This is our virtual book party, so welcome. We do this program once a month on the third Tuesday, and the presenters change. And just looking ahead, I think next month there's a lot of kid and teen presenters, so if you have kids or read a lot of middle grade or YA, definitely sign up for that one. It is on the website the third Tuesday of November. So how this works tonight is we have 5 different presenters, and I'll have them introduce themselves in a second. And they're each going to talk about 5 books. They'll be taking turns. And they each only have about a minute 15 seconds to talk about their book. So it is pretty fast. You don't need to write these titles down. I'll be sending out the list of the books afterwards. As Catherine mentioned, I think everyone was in the room already, but we are recording. We can't see you or hear you. It's just going to be a video of all the presenters, so don't worry about that. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will get back to you sometime during the program. There is a slide of each book and then a time slide when the presenter is supposedly trying to wrap up their book talk. So we always go a little bit over. We'll see how that goes. I think that's all the logistics. So I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. If you could just say your name and then what position that you have at ALD. So Alice, you can go first.
Hi, I'm Alice Kober, and I buy adult fiction for the district.
My name's Allison Corcoran, and I'm one of the adult advisory librarians.
I'm Catherine Bodie, and I am one of the teen services librarians.
I'm Charles. I'm one of the reference librarians at Arapahoe Libraries.
And I'm Jenny. I am a library specialist at the Castlewood Library.
And then panelists, you can mute yourselves if you want when it's not your turn, especially if you have background noise. Just make sure you unmute when it's your turn. I'll try to catch you if you're muted. So we are going to get started with the book talks, and Alice will be kicking us off.
Hi, my first book is An Inconvenient Woman by Stephanie Buellens. I love psychological suspense, and this is a great example. To begin, Claire Fontaine is the ex-wife from hell. Claire has a history of psychological issues that began after the accidental death of her teenage daughter, for which she holds her ex-husband, Simon Miller, responsible. Those close to Claire feel sorry for her, but are concerned about her mental health. They advise her to leave Simon alone. But when Simon becomes engaged to a woman with a young daughter, Claire's anxiety goes through the roof. She stalks him and attempts to meet with his fiancée to convince the woman not to marry him, and that's the last straw for Simon. He hires a woman named Sloan Wilson, and she's a fixer. She calls herself a sin eater. She specializes in taking care of difficult situations. She's a former cop with the Los Angeles Police Department. She starts with gentle persuasion, but moves on to tougher tactics when it's necessary. As Sloan Wilson investigates, facts about both Claire and Simon are revealed that make you wonder if Simon is a charming, wealthy man or a monster, and whether Claire is delusional or the only one who knows the truth about Simon. It's a great story that keeps you in suspense till the very end.
Okay, Leave the World Behind by Ruman Alam. There's so much buzz about this book. You've probably already heard about it. It's already been named as a finalist for the National Book Award. This is a story of a white family who's vacationing in the Hamptons, or further out on Long Island in an Airbnb, when the black couple who owns the house shows up in the middle of the night to tell them there's a massive blackout in New York City and beyond, and they have no idea what's going on. The next few days, these two families are trapped together in the house with no phone, no internet, no idea what's going on in the world. So maybe it's an apocalypse, maybe there's just a small problem. They don't know, you don't know. It's deeply unsettling. So then it really turns into a character study of what goes on between these two families. It is, like I said, it is disturbing, but in a great way, and just a fabulous read.
Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas is probably one of my favorite books of the year so far, and it is perfect for this time of year. If you are looking for a slightly unsettling and creepy Halloween read, I highly recommend this. The main character is Yadriel, and he is a trans boy who has not been accepted by his family, who are brujos, who guard this cemetery where all of their ancestors and others live. He has not been allowed to go through the ceremony to become a brujo. And so he decides that he is going to take it on himself. He is going to perform the ceremony on his own. Essentially, what that requires is for him to summon a spirit and then successfully help that spirit pass on. He summons Julian, who doesn't realize he's dead because he was just walking home from getting tacos, and he is unable to make him go away. Julian is now plaguing Yadriel. He can't get rid of him, but what they discover is that someone is taking boys off of the street. They're disappearing, and it gets even worse when Yadriel's cousin also goes missing. So this one is an excellent story. It's got a great mix of both lighter, funny things as well as dark and creepy, and you're trying to figure out who's stealing the boys.
My first selection is Hood Feminism. This is in the same kind of vein as White Fragility and some of the others. I feel like this one is much more direct though, and forward thinking about how to approach some women's and race issues in the United States. For a long time, the discussion around feminism has been one of, from a privileged perspective. This one kind of covers much more from Black, Indigenous, and people of color from their perspective. It covers everything from gun violence to poverty, education, housing, reproductive rights, etc. It's a very well constructed book. It's blunt. It's very well thought out and well done. Miki Kendall did a great job of kind of illustrating what life has been like for various groups of people in this country for a long time, and I highly recommend it.
So this is my first selection. This is one of the first books I read during quarantine, during the shutdown. And I like to label it speculative fiction that's not as speculative now. It's A Song for a New Day by Sarah Pinsker. And our main character, Luce Cannon, was just breaking out as a queer indie musician when everything shut down. You know, no live music, no movies, very similar to what we're in now. But now, in the present day, she plays secret shows around the nation in any place that will risk it all to provide people with that connection to live music. And our other character, Rosemary, has spent most of her life behind virtual reality. And she barely remembers a time when she could go out into the world. Her new job involves her scoping out new talent for a big business that patents and packages musicians for virtual reality consumption. So kind of like think like, you know, generic pop stars that are then consumed by people online. And one of her scoping missions, she discovers an underground music scene, and she discovers Luce, which is where they make a critical connection to try to change the music scene. And it's a really just good book about the power of music and the power of connection.
You're muted.
I need to learn muting and unmuting. All right. My next book is called Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. When I first saw the title for this book, the first thing I wanted to know was what the term ace meant. It turns out it's a shortened term for a person who is asexual. Being asexual in our society is quite difficult. The author states that American culture, in fact, most cultures, operate on what she calls compulsory sexuality. Sex is regarded as an integral part of becoming an adult and the ultimate connection between two people. So if you don't desire sex, You're regarded as broken. The author estimates that approximately 1% of the population is asexual, yet this group goes mostly unrecognized and misunderstood in our society. For example, even if aces don't experience sexual attraction, they often do want and have loving and romantic relationships with other people. The book is a fascinating blend of memoir, interviews, and historical research, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to understand another form of sexual diversity.
All right. We Are All the Same in the Dark by Julia Hiberlin is my mystery thriller recommendation. This is a story narrated by 3 different people who are all connected to 2 crimes that happened in a small town in Texas, but 20 years apart. And the audiobook is particularly good because they do have 3 different narrators who read the 3 parts. What's amazing about this book, it's a thriller. All thrillers have great plots, but that's what they do. There's lots happening. But this one, the characters are amazing. You really get to know them, to see their development from in the 20 years or just in the course of a week or so in the story. And the other thing is the setting's amazing. It's set in a small town in Texas, and boy, you feel like you're there and even experience it when the characters go on the trip to the big city of Dallas or something. So I think it really packs a punch because it's got all 3. It's got the plot, the characters, and the settings of a great story.
Don't Call the Wolf by Alexandra Ross is fantasy, and it is inspired by Polish mythology. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about it, if you are a fan of the Witcher franchise and you have been wanting more of the like demons and monsters that they fight in that, this book is just full of them. Really unsettling monsters that they fight in this. It's set in a world that is populated by monsters and demons. It is currently being menaced by the Golden Dragon, and no one has managed to slay it. One of the main characters is one of 9 wolf brothers who have gone to try to slay the dragon, and he's the last one left. And he runs into Ren, who is the forest queen and also a like panther shapeshifter who has been kind of holding her own against a losing battle fighting these other monsters. It is really fascinating how you discover how their story unfolds, the way that their destiny intertwines, and some really surprising twists and turns as it goes. That's Don't Call the Wolf.
My next one is When All Is Said by Anne Griffin. This is a fiction work. Anne Griffin is an Irish author. This is similar to The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. It's an older gentleman who's sitting at an inn in his small Irish town, kind of towards the end of his life. He's having 5 different drinks, toasting 5 different people throughout his life. One from his childhood, several in his kind of late adolescence, and then 2 from his later life. It's a very good, I really enjoyed it just because it progresses through his life quite nicely. All parts of his life is not pristine and nice, so it's kind of got some messy elements to it that kind of add to the plot to make it a little bit more exciting and interesting and keeps you engaged. So it's very well written and a very good, easy read.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yellow Bird, Oil Murder and a Woman's Search for Justice in Indian Country by Sierra Crane Murdoch. So this is part true crime, part memoir, and it takes place in North Dakota in the early 2000s during the oil and gas boom, and indigenous tribes are making hand over fist selling their land and selling their rights to these big oil companies that are wanting to come in and drill. And during this time, a man goes missing on the Fort Berthoud Reservation in North Dakota. And an indigenous woman who's not involved in his disappearance or not previously really involved in solving crimes at all, Lisa Yellowbird, decides to get personally involved in investigating what happened to this young man. This book deals with issues of land rights. It deals with issues of the push and pull of land of white colonials, or white settlers coming in and taking over native land. And it's also issues of money and how that impacts Native Americans. And also a lot of talks a lot about life on the reservation. So I highly recommend this book if you want a look into like what life is like on Native American land and how we still kind of appropriate it today and take advantage of it as white settlers.
Hi, my next book is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. The story opens by telling you about why the protagonist, Nora Seed, commits suicide. I almost didn't read past the opening page, but I'm very glad I continued because it turned out to be a very uplifting book. After her death, Nora Seed is transported to a magical library that contains an infinite number of books. One book tells the story of her life as it is. All the other books tell stories about the other lives she could have lived if she had made different choices at any point in her life. She has the chance to live a number of different lives and learns what the outcomes would have been. She likes some of the lives, but she is concerned that she's about finding a life that has meaning for her that will allow her to go on. At one point, the author wrote, "Librarians are soul-enhanced search engines." I got misty when I read that. I love that. And while we all wonder how our lives might have been, what if you had the chance to go to the Midnight Library and see for yourself and experience those lives? Would any of those other lives truly be better than the one you have now?
Miss Benson's Beetle by Rachel Joyce. This one doesn't come out until November, but I really wanted to include it because I enjoyed it so much. And I wanted something a little lighter. It is already on order. Thank you, Alice. This is part adventure story, part comedy caper, and with some tragic overtones. The main character, Marjorie, is a woman who's just led a really horrible life through World War I and World War II, and she never got to achieve her dream of being an entomologist and going in search of golden beetles. And now finally she's going to New Caledonia. She has very little money, no experience, bad health. It's not good. She advertises for a companion and ends up with this kind of floozy of a woman who shows up in a pink cocktail dress and kitten heels to go on this expedition to the tropics. But you will love these two women. Marjorie's confidence and character and strength grows throughout the book, and Enid, her supposed companion, turns out to be a lying, thieving, possibly murderous seductress, and you love her. And you just all need to go to New Caledonia in search of golden beetles with these women.
Punching the Air by it's a novel written in verse by Ibi Saboy and Yusef Salam, who is one of the Exonerated Five, formerly of the Central Park Five. And it is a very timely book. It is about the experience of a young man named Amal, who has been wrongfully imprisoned for attacking a young white man. And the only person who can prove that he is innocent is currently in a coma. The young man he is being charged with attacking has been in a coma since the incident, and so he cannot testify in his favor. But this is really the story of Amal as he is coming to terms with his new circumstances. He's very angry at first, as you might imagine. And through his time in juvenile detention, he discovers art and he discovers poetry, and he finds his voice in that way. It's a beautiful story that really talks about the realities of the systemic racism in our society, as well as a story about humanity and hope.
My next book is The Stranger in the Woods by Michael Finkel. This is another nonfiction work. This is about Christopher Knight, or the North Pond Hermit. It's a gentleman who lived in the Maine woods for almost 30 years. He wandered out into the woods when he was in his mid to late 20s and lived there until, I believe, about 2011. This book deals with several different kind of iterations of his life. It talks about his upbringing in rural Maine. He actually wandered into the woods about 30 miles from where he grew up. They talk about the psychology of kind of being in the woods by yourself for 30 years and how that kind of impacts your kind of social interactions with people. They talk about the court case. They talk about, the state trooper, or actually I believe it was a game warden who was actually hired specifically to track him because they had such a difficult time tracking the North Pond Hermit down. It's a very interesting book. It's a unique look, and it discusses many of the other hermits from history, and it keeps you very much engaged in the topic.
All right, this is my graphic novel selection. It's a young adult graphic novel. It's Heavy Vinyl by Carly Ustain. And our main character, Chris, is working at a record store. She's the new kid, music record store in the late 90s, think like Empire Records kind of. And her favorite band is Stegosaur. And she has a crush on her coworker and friend, Maggie. So something happens one day that leads her to discover that all of her coworkers, who she thought were all like way cooler and awesomer than her, turned out to actually be true. They are a badass girl fighting group that takes on music crimes, a missing band member, and various other music conspiracies. And Chris has to decide if she fits in, and if so, and will she be able to fight? And will Maggie still like her? And will she be able to keep it from her, of course, very dorky parents, because she is a teenager. Lots of fun. I highly recommend.
Hi, my next book is Memorial by Brian Washington. And from the title, this book sounds like a memoir, but it's a novel and a good one. Benson and Mike are two gay men who live together in Houston. Mike is a Japanese-American chef at a Mexican restaurant. I like that one. And Benson is a Black daycare teacher. They've been together for 4 years, and the relationship was exciting in the beginning, but these days they're getting on each other's nerves. They love each other, but they aren't sure if that's a good enough reason to stay together. Then Mike learns that his father is dying in Osaka, Japan. He decides to fly to Osaka to say goodbye. But in the meantime, Mike's mother is on her way to pay him a visit. So while Mike is in Japan, Benson is left to entertain Mike's mother in their one-bedroom apartment. She makes him meals, but rarely speaks, so Benson's left trying to figure out what she's thinking and feeling. And in Japan, Mike learns that his father isn't happy to have him there, but Mike stays because he wants to know more about his family's past and to improve his relationship with his father. The story's told by Mike and Benson in alternating points of view, which gives insight into their characters and also helps the reader understand how assumptions and unspoken feelings have contributed to the breakdown of their relationship. I like this book very much because it accurately depicts how small everyday choices and unspoken feelings can have big effects on love and relationships.
Transcendent Kingdom is by Duchess, who is a Ghanaian American author who wrote Homegoing. This is the story of Gifty, who's a PhD student at Stanford in neuroscience. She's studying addiction in mice, and her interest in that is based on her experience with her brother's heroin addiction and her mother's depression. And in addition to the current story where she's a PhD student, a lot of it also is backstory about Gifty's childhood in Alabama as the child of very religious immigrants. And there's so much in this book. It's sort of the ultimate book club book because you would almost have to pick a topic you want to focus on. There's stuff about families, about immigration, about race, about addiction, mental health, and a lot about science and religion, given her very evangelical upbringing and then her current position in science. So if you're in, well, it'd be great to read otherwise, but also just prime book club material.
The Canyon's Edge is actually middle grade, but I will give a content warning for it before I get going. It has strong themes of PTSD as well as a mass shooting that happens in the past, but is referred to quite a bit. It is a story of Nora and her father who have been dealing with this shooting. They were in a restaurant when a mass shooter came in, and the wife and mother was killed trying to save her daughter. And they have lived pretty much in isolation since then, and they've decided that they're going to go spend a weekend in an Arizona canyon, and a flash flood hits as soon as they get down to the base of a canyon, and Nora's father, is swept away by the flood. And so now Nora is left in this canyon alone with no supplies, and she has to try to figure out how to get out. And at the same time, she is dealing with all of the trauma that has come from previous events in her life. It's a really interesting look. I've seen it compared to like Hatchet meets Long Way Down. If you're familiar with those two books, it definitely has that stories of survival as well as kind of overcoming obstacles and trauma in your past. It is a novel in verse. I don't remember if I said that, and I highly recommend it for any age.
The next one is a recent release. It's Permanent Record by Edward Snowden. It's a nonfiction. This doesn't really get into the technical details. He makes this very palatable for people to understand what he did and why he did it. If you're not familiar, Edward Snowden was the whistleblower on the intelligence community of mass gathering of phone calls, text message, and email, specifically within the United States. And since then, a lot of this has changed. Most intelligence communities need a court-ordered warrant for surveillance of US citizens. But this does talk about his kind of upbringing. His dad worked for the Navy and his mom worked for various intelligence agencies in her career, how he grew up using the old Commodore personal computer and early video games, and how that kind of influenced how he became kind of connected with the intelligence community. He does not have a strong educational background in computers, but it's a very interesting, gives a great insight into what he did and why he did it. So it's very interesting, highly recommend, especially currently.
This is My America. This book is very timely, I will say. It's a young adult novel. Our main character, Tracy Beaumont, her father was convicted of a murder of a white man in their small Texas town and has been sent to prison and is currently sitting on death row. And ever since Tracy has been trying to prove his innocence, the time is running out for her father. Then, unfortunately, her brother Jamal is accused of murdering a young white woman who was working on uncovering a local town conspiracy that possibly involved that girl's boyfriend and the local sheriff's department. And now Tracy has to juggle handling her father's case and trying to prove his innocence, and also defending her brother and proving he is also innocent. It's based on a lot of if you're familiar with the Equal Justice Initiative by Brian Stevenson, and also the Innocence Project is based a lot on that. I will say there's a trigger warning for police violence in this, but overall it's a very riveting novel, and I couldn't put it down until I finished it.
You're muted.
My last book is Jack by Marilyn Robinson. Jack is the fourth book in a series that begins with the book Gilead. Each of the 4 books in the series tells about characters who are from this mythical town of Gilead, Iowa, and they're set in the 1950s. Each book deals in different ways with the concept of grace. Jack Boughton is the son of a preacher. He's deeply flawed, described in the series as a thief, an atheist, drunk, cheat, liar, deadbeat dad, and a terrible disappointment to both his family and himself. When the story opens, Jack has recently been released from prison. He's living in St. Louis and is withdrawn from human contact so he can do harm to no one. But a miracle occurs. Jack falls in love with Della Miles, a high school teacher and the daughter of a church bishop. Unfortunately, Della is Black, and their relationship in the early 1950s is against the law. Jack sees himself as a good-for-nothing bum, but Della draws out his best qualities, his poetic nature, and his desire to protect her. Jack and Della's love story is one of the most beautiful that I've ever read. At one point, Jack describes Della as a woman so lovely in his thoughts that he was afraid of her. I don't know if that's a great example, but the writing is lyrical, and if you like thought-provoking books with deep characters, I highly recommend Jack and the other books in the series, which are Gilead, Home, Lila, and Jack.
Okay, this is nonfiction. It's Becoming Duchess Goldblatt, a memoir by Anonymous. And Anonymous, in this case, the author is a woman whose life, career, marriage, everything was falling apart when someone suggested she start a social media account as someone else entirely, kind of an alter ego. And that was Duchess Goldblatt, who is a mythical woman, supposedly from Klein, Texas, but who currently lives in the fictional town of Crooked Path somewhere. There's no location for Crooked Path. The Duchess is like a kind, loving person to all of her followers, but anyone who has hurt any of her followers, she kind of holds a little grudge against. So she's a duchess, a fake duchess, but still, she's kind of demanding. When she's feeling a little hungry, she'll say, "Why hasn't anyone brought me pie?" And suddenly half of Twitter will send pictures of pie to her and things. She's just very funny, and the memoir is part about the real life and part about how the social media creation helped the anonymous woman heal. If you're on Twitter, you should follow Duchess Goldblatt, and if you're not, there's enough of the quoted tweets in here for you to learn enough about Duchess Goldblatt to get it and read the memoir anyway.
I'll be honest, I picked up A Song Below Water based on the cover because that's how I choose many of my books. I love the cover for this book. It is beautiful and it did not disappoint. It is a set in the modern world, but there are mystical creatures in this world. It kind of reminded me a bit of like The Hate U Give with mermaid and other water-based lore. The main character, Tavia, is a siren, but it is illegal in this world to be a siren because they believe that sirens are dangerous because they can convince you to do anything. And that's not a power that they want these women to have. And her adoptive sister, Effie, we don't really know what she is. She's definitely not fully human. She has an affinity for water, and sometimes her skin comes off. And so that's a little odd. But she is really trying to figure out who she is and where she fits. And this story is about these two sisters kind of discovering themselves, but also fighting against this mounting prejudice that they receive. I loved this book. The author has said that Tavia's character as a siren is a direct metaphor for the experience of Black women in our society in particular and the way that their voices are silenced. And it is just so beautifully written, and it really makes you think long after you've finished reading it.
My last selection is also nonfiction. It's a cookbook, Tasty Pride. It is published by Tasty, which is owned by an arm of BuzzFeed. It has contributors from the likes of Rick Martinez, who recently just left Bon Appetit, Ted Allen from the Food Network, and Anita Lowe, who's been on Iron Chef America and Top Chef Masters. Each recipe has kind of a story or a blurb that goes along with it. They are all very unique, interesting stories, whether it's a dish that they made for their partner the first time that they met, or they cooked for them the first time, or it's a dish that they made for their parents when they were coming out to them. All the dishes are from the LGBTQ community in the cooking world. All the dishes are very approachable and easy to find ingredients. I loved several of the dishes that I did make from this cookbook, and I highly recommend it. Great color, great dishes included in this cookbook.
All right, continuing the queer theme here, Cameron Esposito's memoir, Save Yourself. So those of you who don't know, Cameron Esposito is pretty big, well-known queer comedian. She was raised Catholic and very, very Catholic. In fact, she wanted to be a priest when she was growing up, all the way up until she was in college. And I always forget if it's Boston College or Boston University, where she was, and she discovered she was queer, but the school forbid queer relationships at that time. It talks a lot about being, coming out, realizing your sexuality, balancing issues of faith and sexuality and identity. She talks a lot about being an up-and-coming queer and out comedian and how she was perceived and treated coming out. Also talks a lot about, she talks about like experience of sexual assault, so content warning for that as well. And one other note is that I did listen to this, and it's narrated by her, and it's just charming, it's funny, it's heartbreaking, and it's just all around enjoyable, I think, for fans and people who might not be familiar with her.
Thank you. That is all of our books tonight. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming. We never ever can stick to 30 minutes. We always go a little bit over. And thank you to all the panelists, the book talkers. I know how hard it is to keep your book talks to a minute. You guys all did fantastic. Again, I'll be sending out the list of books that we talked about tonight. So be on the lookout for that in your email. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat now. But otherwise, we are all done, and thank you guys for coming.